Chapter 26. The Tail and the Teeth. Before I could follow Paiyoon, my eye caught movement down the companionway. It was Bo, lingering in the shadows halfway up the stair. I grabbed his arm and pulled him to the bottom of the steps. "What are you doing? The whole crew is up there." Bo rubbed the shell pendant at his collar, looking confused. But did we run aground?" "Run aground? We're in the middle of the ocean." "I know that, but I heard this awful groaning down in the hull. It sounds like something scraping against the timbers." "It's the whales," I said. "You must have heard them crying." Bo yanked his arm away and glowered at me. "I know what whales sound like. Listen." A low creaking sound reverberated beneath us. He was right. It did sound like our hull was scraping up against sand or gravel. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It wasn't a mechanical sort of sound. It was the sound of something alive. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Overhead, we heard the thump of footsteps and sailors' voices drawing near. The crowd was breaking up. Bo cursed under his breath. "I can't go back to the hold, not with that sound." "You can hide in my room. There's so much going on, no one will know. Quick, come on." Inside my cabin, I opened my trunk and threw the clothes on the floor. "Here, you can hide in this. But don't let the lid snap shut or you'll be in your own coffin." I thought he'd be cramped in the trunk, but he folded himself up tightly enough that there was plenty of room. "You've got to be quiet," I whispered. "Stay here. I'll be back soon." "Where are you going?" "To find out just how stupid I've been." I went straight to Paiyoon's cabin and rapped on his door. "Come in." He sat at his desk, leaning over the map he'd been working on. The youthfulness brought on by the sea air had vanished from his face. He looked worn, even older than when we'd left On Lung. I raised my eyes to the books and papers stacked on the shelves along the wall. What a fool I'd been. All those nights working in the hold with Bo, I thought I had found evidence that Paiyoon had missed. But he hadn't missed a single thing. He knew the Sunderlands existed, and he was deliberately steering us away from them. Paiyoon kept his eyes on his desk as I approached. Without looking up at me, he began speaking. 30 years ago, I was aboard the first Mengkon ship to land at Avon's Island. We stayed there a month and quickly learned that these seas are home to all kinds of whales. It was incredible. I trekked up and down the shore, making my measurements, sketching my maps, while mother whales and their calves rose out of the water and splashed down all around us." His mouth stretched into a thin line. "If you were to go to that Rotan captain's cabin, you would probably find a copy of the map I drew 30 years ago." "Sir, you aren't responsible for what's happening out there." "No?" Paiyoon kept his eyes down. "And how about Falin? Before I charted the way, no one in Mengkon knew how to navigate its coasts. I don't even recognize the place it has become." "Yes, but—" Finally, he looked up at me. "It's far worse than whales, Sai. 1,000,000 times worse. We didn't land at Falin. You didn't see, but I've seen it. Mengkon rules over it now. Do you know what it looks like for one country to take over another? Do you know what happens to the people who live there?" The question sent a shiver through me. I swallowed and shook my head as Paiyoon stood up slowly and began to pace the room. "How about Wilna and Dusak? All those faraway places that our queen has never set foot on, but now claims for her own. They have been stripped of their forests, mines have been dug into their mountainsides like open wounds, and their people have been given no choice but to work in them. Mengkon has grown into a bloated beast, devouring all her neighbors. And how does she find her next meal? She uses my maps." When I finally got my words out, my voice trembled. But that's not your fault. If you hadn't made those maps, someone else would have." Paiyoon looked straight at me. "But they didn't, Sai. I did. It's my handwriting on those charts, no one else's." Those maps are your life's work. They've saved lives. Without them, ships would have been dashed to pieces on rocky shores or missed their targets entirely. You should be proud of yourself. Paiyoon's voice was thin and tired. I want to be, more than you know. That is exactly why I had to join this expedition, because I resolved that before my life is over, I will do something I can go to my grave being proud of. I walked to the edge of his desk. Even though I knew the answer, I still had to ask the question. Master Paiyoon, you believe the Sunderlands exist, don't you? Paiyoon stared down at his eyeglass. His fingers shook as he traced the links in his lineal chain. The tail is the teeth, he said quietly. I have never believed that, have you? That the path behind and the path ahead are one and the same? I cannot change the path behind me, Sai, but I can chart a new course ahead. Sir, there are more ships coming along after ours. No matter what you do, all the places are eventually going to be found. So why not let it be us? I placed my fingers on the edge of the desk and dipped my head to catch his gaze. Sir, please. I stood staring at him, waiting for him to look me in the eyes, but he would not. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, Please go down and tell cook not to make supper for me tonight. I clenched my fingers into my palms. Yes, sir. I let the door swing shut behind me. I stood in the narrow hallway a moment, waiting for the heat to go out of my face. I was furiously angry, though if anyone at that moment had asked me at whom, I wouldn't have been able to say. All I knew was that everything I had been working toward was crumbling beneath my feet. I wanted to talk to Rian, but when I knocked on her door, she didn't answer. Back on deck, the air smelled metallic, like iron. A few sailors still crowded at the side, looking out at the little Rotan whaling ship. Lark waved me over to him. I was surprised to see that the whaling crew had stopped their work. The baby whale still struggled in the net while the whalers crowded around the body of the adult whale they had killed and dragged on board. It was clear they were arguing about what to do. They shouted at one another, and some looked genuinely panicked. One sailor pointed at the dead whale's body and waved his arms wildly at his comrades. A track of 4 dark scars ran along the whale's flank from its head to its tail. Will you look at those scratches, said Lark with awe. Do you suppose those wounds are from a battle with a giant squid? If that's true, then those whalers are deathly afraid of squid, I said. The Rotan crew had snapped into action. Several whalers were hurriedly freeing the little whale from the net. My heart eased as the baby glided into the water and swam away with its mother. The other whalers used oars to push the scarred whale's body off the ship. What? They're leaving? Sneered Grebe. Look at that! It's like shoving off a solid gold bar and letting it drop straight to the bottom. The whalers didn't look like they cared. They looked like they wanted to get away from that spot as fast as possible. Captain Sangra ordered us back on course. I stayed on deck as we sailed south, leaving the whaling bark in our wake. A dozen birds from the flock of harbingers stayed behind, circling in the air above the bloodied water. But 2 birds remained with the Prosperity, tracking us high above our masts.